Thank you very much for joining us today and our conversations with leaders.
Thank you, Mark. So this is really odd to give a talk where you can't really see other people. So I am going to hope that you will populate the chat area, and we'll try to keep this as engaging as possible. But normally, you know, in our pre-COVID life, which I desperately want back, we'd be in the same room. So as Mark said, I graduated from Ohio University, and then thanks to some really great advice from my advisor there, Sandra Haggerty, I went on to law school at The Ohio State University. I've been a lawyer now for 35 years. And it's been an amazing, just an amazing career. So I'll just start with, you know, one of the things I often say when I give these talks, particularly to young people who are out there, is that being a lawyer, I think, gave me confidence and made me fearless. Like, I grew up at OU. I had great advisors at OU who really helped me see what was possible. As a kid coming from inner city Columbus, I never had been away from home and had no idea what to expect in college. But two things happened. One is I was selected to be on the Dean of Students Advisory Committee with Carol Harder, and she was a force of nature. If you can imagine a woman in the it was 1979, she just held her own amongst the men. She was the first woman that I saw who was just in charge, unafraid of who she was. She didn't suffer fools, and I was just in awe of her and of all that she did at Ohio University. She went on to become the president of UNLV, but I had her as kind of my first role model when I got to OU. I think I was a sophomore when I was selected to be on her student advisory panel. But then I was fortunate enough to have a great advisor named Sandra Haggerty, a Black woman who also saw something in me before I could see it in myself. And she encouraged me to think about law school. So that's kind of how I got into this space. But what's been really terrific is that as opportunities have come my way, I've been open to taking those opportunities. So whether it was going to the state attorney general's office, I actually wanted to go to Washington, but that opportunity was a great opportunity, allowed me to try cases. It really helped me develop my skills as a lawyer, and then becoming a judge at 32, which I said to some law students recently, you know, at 32, I thought I was so sophisticated. I completely understood, you know, what I needed to do to be a judge. And now that I have a daughter who's 33, I'm like, oh my God, that was so young. What was I thinking? But it all worked out. And then leading me to now be at Jones Day at this pivotal moment, talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and quite honestly, race in America. And so that's kind of what I want to spend my talk with you about today. I've spent all of my career being the first, being the only in the room. And while that's a significant achievement, it really doesn't matter if there aren't people that follow you. And so I've been fortunate to have great role models. And as you look at your organizations or your leadership, your goal has to be, how do you bring other people along with you? If you are the first, if you are one of a few, if you are in charge of a division or department, you have to be thinking about, how do we ensure real diversity, inclusion, and equity in this space? And when the George Floyd incident happened, followed by the uproar over Breonna Taylor and so many others, it really shined a light on our country and made each of us, I think, really think about what we perceive to be justice in our country and what was actually going on. And immediately after it happened, I had my own personal trauma dealing with it as the mother of 3 children. My son is our youngest, and he's 23, thinking about how or why in 2020 should my children, especially my son, still be dealing with these things. And then being a leader in the law firm and dealing with the trauma from my young associates who all we've ever taught them is that if you study hard, you do well, the playing field is even, and yet what they see in front of them is not depicting that reality. And then the third thing, I gave a similar talk yesterday, was dealing with so many of my white colleagues who kept coming to me saying, I don't know what to say, help me understand, and trying to say to them, I don't have the emotional capacity right now to heal my trauma, help our young folks deal with their trauma, and educate you. You're going to have to give me some space. And I think for many people, many white people who were well-intentioned, that was not the answer they were looking for. And I've since had the chance to say to them and others as I've given these talks, is that, you have to give space for people to heal, do their own self-healing, but then you have to open up opportunities to have those conversations. And yesterday, in talking to a group of lawyers, a senior leader said, but I feel uncomfortable starting the conversation because I tried in my company and I was shut down. The person said to me, I don't have to explain it to you. And what I said to her and what I would say to you is these conversations have to continue for a period of time. And even if you get shut down initially, the thing you have to say to the person you're talking to is, I understand if you can't talk to me now, but I want you to understand that I'm interested in learning. And so if at some point you want to have this conversation, I'll be open to it. I don't want to pressure you. I don't want to push you. But the only way we as a country start to heal collectively and to move forward is to be able to have those open and honest conversations with each other. And so it's so interesting to find myself in this role doing diversity and inclusion at this moment in history, because I will tell you in all candor, I avoided doing diversity and inclusion as a young lawyer because I didn't want to be identified as just the diverse person. I wanted to just come in, do my job, and not have to do the extra. But as I approached coming into this law firm after I'd been here a couple of years and our managing partner asked me to consider taking this role, I started thinking about what I just said to you. If I don't use the benefit of my experience to help those coming up behind me, to help the law firm be better on diversity and inclusion, then all of this experience I have doesn't really mean anything. And so it became a lot easier for me to say yes once I sat with the opportunity. And for any organization that's looking at how do we do diversity, equity, and inclusion, the first thing is you just have to start. You have to not worry about, well, is so-and-so going to think that somebody's getting an advantage because of their race? No, that's not what diversity, equity, and inclusion means. It really means making sure that the playing field is truly level. It's making sure that to the extent that there are barriers, that we're very intentional about removing those barriers, whether it's where we recruit from, how we recruit, opportunities that we give for leadership training. And I'll give you an example. One company that I work with had a referral system where if you referred someone, you got a bonus if the company ended up hiring that person. Well, that's great, except we tended to refer people who were like ourselves. And so if the company is having an issue with diversity, having an employee referral program only reinforces that program, because we live in a world, most of us, and I'm guilty of this too, where I come home from work, I live in a neighborhood that is non-diverse. I socialize with people who look like me. I assume my neighbors socialize with people who look like them. It's not being pejorative. It's just we as humans tend to connect with people who are like ourselves. And it takes real effort to get outside of that bubble and build relationships with people who are different from you. And so looking at those barriers, unintentional policies that may be interfering with your ability to move the needle or to advance yourself. The other thing I would say to you is that if you are diverse or non-diverse, just be open to meeting people where they are. Every year when our new lawyers start, I send out an email to them and I say, I want to encourage you to come out of your office, get to know the people you work with, because even though those people may look different than you, they may share a common experience. And it's important for you to engage with people, to connect with them beyond what's on the outside, to really get a sense of who people are. In my career, the people who have supported me the most and have given me opportunity have been white men. They were the people in power. They saw something. They gave me opportunity to stretch and to advance my skills. You can't always assume that because somebody looks different than you, that they're not going to be the person who becomes your biggest promoter and helps open the door for advancement to you. The other thing I would say is, while, you know, all of us can get caught in the social media cycle, and you read the most horrific things online, you know, I like to start with what Arthur Ashe said. Arthur Ashe said once, he said, you start with what you take what you have, you start where you are, and you do what you can. And so some of us feel like we don't have any ability to create change. You absolutely do. All of us have skills. All of us have a sphere of influence. All of us have ability to impact that influence. And so if you start in your world, start in your family, start in your work environment, start in your neighborhood, you have the ability to create change. But this is the thing. Whenever you're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, you've got to stay away from labels. People cannot hear you unless you can talk to them in a way that doesn't feel like you're attacking them or that you're being pejorative about them. And so it's really important that language is careful and that you allow people to make mistakes. That sometimes people are going to say things to you that offend you. And you have to be willing in the moment, in a non-emotional way, to say to them why you didn't appreciate whatever the comment was. You have an obligation to do that. Sometimes the comment may not be to you, but you may be in the presence of somebody making the comment about somebody else. Each of us, as Gandhi once said, we have to be the change we want to see in the world. So each of us has the responsibility to stand up against injustice or bigotry or hurtful or inartful statements, because we don't learn if people don't call us out. So let me give you an example, and it shocked somebody when I said this to them. I hate the word minority. I think when you refer to people as minority, you are already setting up an unequal system. So if I'm a minority and you're a majority, that to me feels very pejorative. So I have asked people that when they are referring to people of color, don't say minority, say diverse, because that's what I am. I am a diverse person. I am a person of color. You can say that, but I am not a minority. I am a human. And I think we've got to quit giving labels that unconsciously send signals to people that they are somehow less than. A minority is less than a majority, and I am not a minority. I am a person of color. And don't say to me that you don't see color, because that's also offensive. I want you to see color. I want you to see me. I want you to appreciate that I am a Black woman. Saying you don't see color is dismissive, because in candor you do. I see your color and you see mine. And then finally, before I open it up for questions, I got a question yesterday that I think may be helpful for this audience. Yesterday, somebody asked me, what does white privilege mean? Can you explain white privilege? I've seen so much on social media by people being offended by the term white privilege, because they think it somehow suggests that you became successful for something other than your hard work and effort. Let me boil down to you what white privilege in the context of social justice means. It is not meant to insult that you didn't work hard for what you've achieved, that you didn't study hard to become educated. What white privilege means is that you don't have to deal with some of the microaggressions that people of color deal with in their daily life. I'll give you a good example. And I was actually talking to somebody from an executive from Best Buy when I gave this example. So one of my friends is married, she's Black, she's married to a guy that's white. And we were having this debate over dinner one night because she always uses, I always use my husband when I have to buy anything or get restaurant reservations. I'm like, you're being ridiculous. You do not. And she's like, yeah, literally, like when you go into Best Buy, if you've ever been to Best Buy, if you buy something big, you walk out with it, you have to show your receipt to the guy standing at the door. And my friend's husband said, I never show my receipt. I just walk out. I'm like, you have to show your receipt. They are not letting you walk out the door. It would never occur to me not to have my receipt ready because I just know I'm going to get stopped if I don't show my receipt. So we all went to Best Buy. There's him as a white man, and then the three of us who are Black, we stand back. He buys this big TV and he simply walks out the door. They don't ask him for a receipt. They don't ask to see. He just walks out the door. My husband comes by with the same size TV and he is asked to show a receipt. That's what is meant by white privilege. That there are things that white people take for granted that we as Black people simply don't. It's whether it's the talk you have with your kids when they start driving, or when you walk into a boardroom and you're the only person there, or you see another Black person, you get excited because there's another Black person. White people never have that experience because everywhere they go, every environment they're in, there are other people like them. That's all white privilege means. It's not meant to insult you. It's meant to identify that there are things that you can take for granted that people of color can't. And so because of the number of questions I got on this yesterday, I just thought it might be helpful to explain that to you. So this is how I spend my work now. I do still do legal work, but it's about half and half. I do legal work with clients. This morning I was on the call with a client, helping them with their diversity strategy around recruiting and retention. I do arbitrations, and then I also work with the law firm and clients on diversity, equity, and inclusion, because I do think that we still have a ways to go. We have a ways to go when we can have conversations without people, resorting to their tribes, getting upset, just not being willing to face what other people have to deal with. And I think once we can get to that point, we really will have fulfilled the constitutional promise of this country. Yesterday, somebody asked me what gives me hope, and this is what gives me hope. And then I absolutely am going to open this up to questions. My grandmother, and it probably explains a lot about who I am and why I push as hard as I do, but my grandmother was born in 1906 in Macon, Georgia, on a sharecropper's plantation. And she was a proud woman, a smart woman, not an educated woman. But the thing that I remember most about her is that despite all evidence to the contrary, because she grew up in the Jim Crow South, she worked as a domestic when she came to Columbus. But despite all evidence to the contrary, she believed that if we went to school and we got our education, we could be anything we wanted to be. And she would tell me that all the time. You go to school, you learn everything those people have to teach you, because once they teach it to you, they can never take it away. And so because of her belief in the equality of America, the opportunity of America, even though she didn't experience that in her own life, she gave that to all of us. And so I am here because of her, and I am determined to leave this patch of earth that I have better than I found it. And that's what I think each of you can do. No matter where you are, no matter your circumstance, you have the ability to make your patch of earth better than you found it. So, Alex, do we have questions? Because I can't see you.
So I don't have any in the chat window right now, but if anyone wants to answer a question, I'm going to open up the microphone. So feel free to mute your microphone if you don't want to be open. There's also a raise hand icon in the right column that you can use to ask a question. But I do have a question for you, just real quick. So, given the world we live in now, say in regards to diversity and inclusion, what are some of the biggest challenges that you see now in the workforce when you're dealing with, say, a multi-generational and even a multilingual workforce right now? What are some of the biggest challenges that you see or that come about?
So I think the biggest challenge, I think, is that we keep hearing people talk about, particularly in the professional schools, about pipeline. Like, how do we build pipeline? How do we increase the number of Black and brown children that go to college or that go to professional schools? And I like to say to people, it's a multi-pronged approach, right? You have to deal with first education, getting kids access to quality education. And, you know, I heard there's a book called How to Be an Anti-Racist, and the author spoke in New Albany the other night. And one of the things he said is we have to be honest about the disparity between the amount of resources spent in suburban secondary education and the amount of resources spent in urban secondary education. And so until we can create a system that gives all children the right to get the best education possible so that they can be prepared to enter higher education, the pipeline program is going to continue to exist. And we've got to be willing to not always assume that because somebody doesn't do X score on a standardized test, that they aren't capable of succeeding in higher ed. In fact, Kenji, the author of this book on how to be anti-racist, he made the point from his research that the only difference between those who do well on a standardized test like an SAT and those who do poorly is the financial status of their parents. So if you look at those people who typically do well on an SAT or other standardized tests compared to those who don't, the primary difference is the economic status of their parents. And I can tell you, you know, having put 3 kids through college, that's absolutely true. I mean, our kids all had SAT prep. They all had the benefit of the extras going through school so that they could all do well on standardized testing. Those are some of the disparities we don't like to talk about because we like to believe like everybody's got the same shot. Everybody can pull themselves up from their bootstrap. But as Thurgood Marshall once said, you first have to have boots to be able to pull them up. So I think that's the reality we are starting to confront now in this social justice post-Floyd movement.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I do have another question here in the chat window from Amista. How hard is it in our current world, that being virtual right now, to promote diversity and inclusion, and what recommendations might you have for this?
You know, I serve on the board of another college, and it is really a challenge right now, particularly for students. And imagine if you're a first generation student and you are online. So you don't even have the social support of your peers in an on-campus environment, or if you're at work and you are a diverse person, you haven't had a chance to make many relationships in your employment environment, it is really a challenge. What I have encouraged people in the work world and in higher ed is to make time every day to reach out to those diverse people who are in your sphere, whether they're in your department or in your company. Make time to reach out to them just to say hello, just to check in. Let them know that you're thinking about them. Is there anything that you can do? Because it can feel very isolating and it can feel very lonely, particularly if, and I'll just use law firms as an example, if nobody in your family has ever been a lawyer and you've just started to work, like our new lawyers will be starting virtually. So you come into a law firm environment, you have no idea what the rules of the road are. You don't have anybody in your family who's a lawyer. It's pretty intimidating on its best day. And then couple that with working alone in your apartment, it just elevates your stress and impacts your mental health. And so one of the things that we as leaders have to do is to devise a strategy, whether it's a tickler system or putting it on your calendar, to take some time out of each day and connect with your employees, with your students, and particularly those that are diverse. Look for opportunities to create what I call small virtual coffees A lot of people want to talk now about social justice issues. Schedule some small 4 or 5 person groups just to get together and talk. Don't have an agenda. Just say, if the floor is open, let's talk about whatever you want to talk about. There are a group of women in Columbus. There's 6 of us, 3 white women who are CEOs, and then 3 Black women who are CEOs or otherwise community leaders. And we get together every other month by Zoom just to talk about what we're experiencing, talk about what's going on in life, in the media, in our companies. It's a really great opportunity for plans connection. And I think that's what we have to do in this virtual world. We just got to be much more thoughtful about it.
Absolutely. Do we have any other questions out here? I'm going to surf through the chat window really quick. I did have another question while we wait on any other questions to come through. So what recommendations may you have for leaders within organization who, so that they can become more aware and more effective for, recognizing others who might work with them or underneath them to kind of help them advance in their career or advance in the, in organization that they're in. I know sometimes people may feel stifled, or they may feel like, hey, I'm not being promoted because of my color, or because I'm a woman, or things like that. What recommendation can you give the leader to kind of push that forward or kind of help out in that regard?
So I do think it's important for leaders to be unafraid to have the conversation. I think so often these days people are worried about lawsuits and, if I say the wrong thing. I think whenever you talk to somebody in an authentic way, you don't have to worry about that. Can I guarantee you nobody won't take offense? No, but I think approaching someone and saying, tell me what you're interested in doing here at the company. How can I help you advance? I think those are valuable discussions. I also think it's important that for those employees that want to advance, they have somebody inside the company or outside the company that can have real talk with them, right? That can say to them, look, what are you doing to advance your skills? What is it you need to learn to go to the next level? And for the person who wants to be advanced to take that seriously, and for the person in the company who's in charge, to see how they can be an advocate for them, be a sponsor for them, help them understand what it's going to take to advance to the next level. And part of that is being honest with people on evaluations. People hate to be honest on evaluations. Like they'll always say meeting expectations. But then when you're in the room with them, they'll be saying, oh, this person does this, they do this, they do this. And I'm like, but that's not what's on the evaluation. The evaluation says they meet expectations. People can't advance if you're not honest with them about the skill deficits that they need to improve on. And the other thing is that a leader can't worry that just because they're trying to help someone advance, that they're somehow being discriminatory against their white employees. You should be trying to help everybody advance. What I'm suggesting to you is that you don't minimize or marginalize your diverse employees by not giving them the same attention that you give your white employees. It's an even playing field when you have even opportunity. And this is where it can manifest itself. When you're selecting leaders, how does that happen? Is it somebody taps you on the shoulder and says, now it's time for you to be promoted? Is it a competitive process where people fill out applications and there's one person making the decision, or is there a panel of people making the decisions? Look internally about how you make your promotion and advancement decisions, and see if there is some implicit bias in that process, and be intentional about moving it. All of us have blinders, and humans, if left to their own devices, are going to hire people exactly like themselves because we think we're great. So why wouldn't we have more of us in the company? It's really, you have to be very thoughtful and very intentional about it.
Absolutely, thank you. I have a question from the audience here from Nora Sullivan. Your mic should be open now, Nora, if you want to go ahead and ask your question. Nora, are you still there? Okay, I can't hear, but it looks like she also typed it here. Her question was, how do you suggest managing the use of other terms, such as your example of the word minority, in respect to establishing policy, affecting change, and dismantling white supremacy?
So I think you have to point it out, right? So when I was on a call with a client and she kept using the word minority, I didn't embarrass her on the call. What I did is I called her after the call and said, I just want you to know that I think we should change your vocabulary and say diverse or underrepresented people. And that's one way when you're drafting policies, you can say historically underrepresented people. And quite honestly, when you're doing diversity work and you have policies where you want to promote diversity, you should say historically underrepresented people is a way to address that, or diverse people. Now, when you say diverse people, oftentimes white women are included in that, and you can decide that's what you want to have, or you can say women and racially diverse people when you're drafting policies.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. I have another question here from Rabina in the audience. What are the best practices for a company to be sure that their inclusion program actually works and doesn't become just another hot topic or program? How does it become part of the culture of the company?
So that's a great question. One is it starts with the leadership, right? And so the CEO has to be talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, not just diversity and inclusion, but diversity, equity, and inclusion as part of a core value of the company. Something that has happened as a result of the George Floyd incident is now we've always had these ESG, environmental, social justice criteria for public companies. What you've started to see now is when all of these CEOs, there are like 1,000 CEOs after George Floyd, who signed these statements of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Well, now what's happened, particularly on the West Coast in the tech industry, is that plaintiffs' law firms have now started filing what we call shareholder derivative suits against these public companies where the CEO has gone out and talked about diversity, equity, and inclusion and their commitment to it, yet inside the organization, there is no evidence of diversity, equity, and inclusion in terms of who their senior leadership is, maybe how their board looks. And so if your CEO is committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion, they have to start using those words. They have to start identifying it as a core value in addition to the other core values of the company. Once they start articulating that, then it becomes public facing, and it should be part of the ethos of the internal organization. And everything the organization is doing should be looked at through that diversity, equity, and inclusion lens. Now, for some companies who are just starting, you may want to hire a consultant to come in and do a scan of your organization. Where are your barriers to advancement for diverse employees? Do you have a lot of entry level diversity and then no diversity when you get beyond the first rung of management? Does your C-suite look all white and all male? Doing that kind of organizational scan will let you know where your barriers are, and then will give you something to aim for. A lot of times, if it's getting people in the door, it's about recruiting. Where are we recruiting? Is it from the same schools where we all went? Are we looking at historically Black colleges? Are we looking at historical diverse professional organizations like Hispanic MBAs, Black lawyers, Black physicians? There are a number of places where you can go to recruit, but you've got to be intentional in soliciting those places. There's Hispanic MBAs, women MBAs, Black MBAs, Black professors. There's all of these groups where you can identify diverse people to go after and recruit. And I think you have to be intentional about doing that. The other thing that doing a scan of your organization will also let you take a look at is, do you have a deficit compared to what's available in the marketplace? So let's say you have a whole finance department and your business analyst in this finance department is maybe 2% diverse, but the market of business analysts is 25% diverse, then you have to figure out why is your diversity so low if the available market is 25%. Same thing like in IT. If you look at an IT department, 30% of people graduating in computer technology and information technology in Ohio are people of color. So if your IT department is 5% people of color, you've got to be asking, where are we going to recruit? Why are our numbers so different from the available pool? That's where you start, and then you build from there.
Awesome, thank you, thank you. I have a similar question from a city council member in the city of Athens. They say, I am an Athens city council member, and the city of Athens is consistently seeking more diversity in city government, including on boards and commissions. We are fortunate to have residents of color in our community who are very engaged, but those individuals are already doing all that they can, and we need to recruit many more diverse community members to become involved. Do you have any suggestions for improving our outreach in a city like Athens?
Yeah, it's very hard. I often tell people that February is the busiest month for me, and I'm in Columbus. I'm like, there are other Black people in Columbus. I am not the only Black History Month speaker. So yes, I really get that. The good thing about being in Athens is you have a university that hopefully, once we get out of COVID times, we'll be able to recruit more diverse people, because you do have to be careful about burning out the few people who want to be engaged, who happen to be people of color, because their bandwidth is only so much. I think one of the opportunities you might have, Athens is a beautiful place to live, and it may be when you're at these municipal conferences and you're meeting people from other areas, if you have job opportunities, talk to people about, would they be willing to come in for an interview, to come check out Athens? You know, there might be opportunities for them to raise their family in a different environment than where they currently are. Reach out to the university and their diverse faculty organizations to see if you can get those people more involved in the what's going on in the city, because they live there. It's a challenge, but please be careful. Don't burn out the few people that you have, because then they're going to just get burned out and go be like, I'm done. But I do think Athens is close to Columbus now, since they redid the freeway. There are people that live in Lancaster or the other part, east-western part of Franklin County, who could drive in, might be willing to move to Athens. You just never know. You just have to let people know that you're interested and you're looking for them. It's a long-term process, but it can happen.
Thank you. I had another question here. How do you get buy-in when your administration wants to push diversity, but want to limit the curriculum because it is too controversial?
Oh, is it an academic setting?
This question, it doesn't really say, but I guess it could be a corporate setting or an academic setting. How would you if you're getting pushback,
Yeah.
go ahead. If you're getting pushback from the organization in general, but they want to limit it because it's too controversial. How do you deal with something like that? Or have you ran into any of this?
I have.
Corporate setting.
Yeah. So one of the things is you have to find out why it's viewed as controversial, right? And so I think sit with whoever is saying that it's too controversial. I think you need to sit with them and understand why. And sometimes you do, depending on the culture of the organization, you have to build up to certain concepts, right? So maybe people can't start out reading How to Be an Anti-Racist because the title just scares them. So you find some other book that introduces them to the topic in a way that they can start to learn. You know, as I said earlier, I'm a big believer that people can't learn if they can't hear you. So if whomever you're trying to get approval for the curriculum believes it's too controversial, you first got to find out why. And there is enough in history, that you can use history as a great teaching model, that I would find it hard for people to say it's too controversial. But find out the reasons and then look for another way to address that concern. I always like to talk with people when they, one of the talks I did is somebody said, with the Amy Coney Barrett, people were talking about, activist judges and conservative judges. And I said, whether you think a judge is activist or conservative depends on whether you're on the winning side or the losing side. And the reality is the courts have been part of what has held this country together, because we have people who recognize the legitimacy of the courts. When you start undermining the legitimacy of the courts by making judges political, you undermine the very foundation of the country. And so I always like to use Thurgood Marshall as an example. So when Plessy versus Ferguson came out, I think in 1890 or around there, and the United States Supreme Court said separate but equal was the law of the land, because the government could provide separate but equal facilities. There was a man, the dean of Howard's Law School, called Charles Hamilton Houston, who said, okay, separate but equal. We are going to hold the country at their word. They're saying they can provide separate but equal. Let's challenge that. So he raised a generation of scholars, including Thurgood Marshall, but there were others, and they started going around state by state to prove that separate was not equal. They would go into colleges like the University of Maryland, and then go to a historically Black college in that same state and show that the resources were not equal, that public schools were not equal. They built a body of work that then allowed them in 1954 with Brown versus Board of Education, with evidence, to use the rules that had been set up to show that separate is never equal. And that's how they won a unanimous Supreme Court decision, by taking the rules that they'd laid out. It took longer. It took longer than just the immediate change we want to see, but the change came nonetheless. So in your own environment, when people say to you something is too radical, we don't want you to teach this, find another way. Find another way to address the topic in a way that the people who will hear it can understand it, and then take them the next step.
Very interesting. Thank you for that response. I just got a few more questions here. This was actually really good. Could you talk a little bit about your role as an attorney advising clients as it pertains to inclusion for those of different sexual orientation or transgender individuals, especially in today's potentially hostile political environment?
Yeah, well, the environment's just not hostile to same-sex or transgender people, so it's hostile to all of us right now. What I advise companies, and it's really, I think most companies, particularly those public companies, have dealt with this issue. It's about equality and equity. And so it's really about just creating opportunities for people to bring their whole self to work. We have transgender people who come into work and they are treated respectfully, and we talk to them and educate ourselves on what their needs are in the work environment, and we hold our employees accountable to, you will treat this person with respect. There won't be any joking about them. You will treat them, we have, if they're going from a man to a woman, you will treat them as a woman, and you will be respectful of that. I think it's all about respect and admitting what you don't know. It's okay to sit down with people and say, what is it that you need from us in your work environment, and to strategize together on how to make that happen. The most important thing, though, is that person or the people who are transgender, LGBTQ, or racially diverse need to know that they are safe, respected, and accepted in their work environment, and your policies need to lay that out. And right now, LGBTQ people have the same rights as racially diverse people and women.
Absolutely. Just got just a few more questions here. I know we're kind of coming up close to the 1 o'clock hour. So how do you encourage companies and organizations to use job application processes that encourage diversity within the applicant pool, especially when the leadership isn't open to change or of the belief that if it isn't broke, why fix it?
Well, but that's the issue, right? It is broke. If your company is not representative of the people in your geographic region, then it is broke. And what I advise clients all the time, and actually just had the conversation this morning, what we have to do is diverse people are out there, so we've got to look for them. And so it's really changing where we recruit from, looking at the unintended consequences of, using only employee referrals, looking for, like the councilman asked about Athens. A lot of people, you can work from home now. We've all discovered how to operate these Zoom cameras now. So look at, are there positions that allow for work from home so that if your immediate geographic area is not diverse, that you can do a telework situation, or where people can come into the office a couple days a week and work from home a couple days a week. It allows you to expand your geographic reach, but it's really about looking for recruiting. And this is an important thing in your company. Sometimes it's better to recruit the leader, somebody who's going to be in the senior management team who's diverse, as you start to recruit diverse people in the entry and mid-level positions. Because as a diverse person, if you're recruiting me to your company and I look up and I don't see anybody who looks like me, it's going to be really hard for me to think that there is opportunity for me here in this company. And so part of it is saying to your leadership, if we are not diverse in 2020, there is a problem. It is broken. And we can make a difference just by where we recruit, opportunities that we provide, and maybe extending our geographic reach. The world is getting more diverse, not less diverse. And if you happen to be part of government or part of a public company, you should understand that this is what I always use with clients. If you can sell your clients to your products to 100% of customers, why would you limit yourself to selling your product to less than 50% of customers? The world is becoming diverse. You need all voices at the table so that you understand how your product interfaces with people who may be non-white.
Absolutely. Stephanie says, my niece and nephew's generation seems so much more inclusive, which gives her hope that with each successive generation and with all of us working to change things for the better, we can make changes. Have you observed and experienced members of the younger generation being more inclusive?
Absolutely. I think that's true. I mean, there was an article in the New York Times a year ago that said literally in 3 generations, we probably won't have the identified races that we have now. There won't be Black, Hispanic, Asian, because they gave some statistic like 2 out of 5 marriages are interracial. And if you just carry that forward, for 3 generations, everybody's going to be a little bit of something. So it's all going to be multiracial. So yes, I do see the younger generation being much more inclusive, but here's what happened. George Floyd happened. So my son and daughters, they went to predominantly white schools, but they had a mix of friends. They had international friends, they had white friends, they had Black friends. And I really think that in their friend group, they all felt the same. And then George Floyd happened. And particularly for my youngest son, who has experienced probably the most affluent lifestyle than the older 2, I think for the first time it dawned on him that the world saw him as a Black man, because he viewed himself as much more multicultural, and everybody gets along. All my friends are different. We all hang out. But the fear generated following the George Floyd thing, I think, made all of them take a pause. I think we'll get past it. I think we'll be able to, instill that hope that this younger generation has. but they are what gives me hope. I do think that in the future, their world will be a little different. It's going to probably take the generation after them, though, to really fully experience what we're describing.
Absolutely. And I think this question kind of ties into that. Could you offer any strategies or things to focus on when trying to teach young people or children the importance of diversity and inclusion? And that question was from Daniel in the audience.
Yeah, I think for our young kids, I think it's important, given whatever their age level is, to have a conversation about the importance of surrounding yourself with people who are different than you. Whenever I give a commencement speech, I always say to the graduating class that I hope in your life you will have people who think you're full of shit, excuse my language, because I think we can't always be surrounded by people who are our cheerleaders. We need to be surrounded by people who think differently than us, people who challenge our ideals of the world, people who look different than us, because it's really through stretching ourselves and what we think that we can develop commonality. I think at our core, most people, the vast majority of people, are really good people. And we just have to get past this thing where if I disagree with you, that makes me a bad person or you a bad person. No, it just means that we have different ideas. And I think the more we can say to our kids that you may disagree with your friend down the street, but that doesn't make his opinion wrong any more than it makes your opinion right. One of the things you should try to do is understand why each person feels differently to see if you can come to a common resolution. And then if you can't, as long as that person isn't a racist or denigrating your soul or your character, it's okay to be friends with them if they see the world differently. I think having those conversations are really important. I think it's important for kids to understand. I've had this with my kids in the last 6 months, that when you are not in our house, the world is first going to judge you by what they see and then by what you say. And we have to let kids know that that is honest, because we all do it. We all make snap judgments of people when we first see them. But the thing they have to keep in their mind is, don't be struck by what's on the outside, because that doesn't say who a person is. Listen to what they say, judge them by their work, judge them by their character. And that is an ongoing conversation in the midst of all of this that we have to keep saying to our children. And then we have to be careful in what we say around them, because I have to be honest, in this current political environment, I've said some snap things that I've heard when I've heard leaders on TV say something, I've reacted in the moment. When your children are around you, it's okay to say, I shouldn't have said that. That was probably inappropriate, because we're all human and we all will act emotionally in the moment. But just know that they're watching always.
Absolutely, absolutely, and thank you for that. And hey, just to kind of wrap up here, I have one more question that kind of ties into that. Someone in the audience asked, what are some of the materials or educational information that one could use or read to inform themselves more on diversity and inclusion and what it is, or just to better educate themselves? Whether it be a young person, whether it be leaders or in an organization, what materials can some folks reference to better inform themselves?
So I love the book White Fragility. I listened to it on tape. I think it's very well done, because it causes you to think about things, particularly if you're a white person. She asked the question, she said, the way to think about it is, when you were growing up, were there people of color that lived near you? Did you play with people of color? If not, did you ever think about that? She raises some really thought-provoking questions that I think we can all learn from, regardless of your race. But it's a great book, White Fragility. And then How to Be Anti-Racist, I think, is a really good book. Michelle Alexander has a couple of books that are great to read. I'm a big believer in just educating you. You may not agree with all of the concepts, but it's a great way for you to kind of understand the topic and then to appreciate whether or not you agree with it. Also, the New York Times series, the 1619 Project, that is an excellent resource. Please, it's a podcast. You can go on, listen to the podcast. It's very easy to hear, but the 1619 Project, I think, is excellently done. 1619 is the year the first enslaved people arrived in North America. And it really is a very well done piece that traces from 1619 to the present day.